Death is the one reality every human being shares without exception, no matter how powerful, intelligent, wealthy, or loved someone becomes. Every person eventually confronts the fact that life has an ending. And for most people, that realization creates deep psychological discomfort and fear. The fear of death is not simply about pain or physical disappearance alone. It is tied to uncertainty, identity, attachment, and the unknown beyond existence. Human beings are aware of their mortality in a way few creatures are, and that awareness shapes behavior far more than most people consciously realize. Psychologists often describe humans as meaning-seeking creatures by nature. People build identities around relationships, goals, memories, beliefs, and personal purpose. Death threatens all of those psychological structures at the same time. It forces the mind to confront the possibility that everything eventually ends. Aging intensifies this fear because it makes mortality feel increasingly visible. Wrinkles, slower movement, physical exhaustion, and changing appearance become reminders. The body quietly signals that time is moving in only one direction, and many people struggle emotionally with losing the version of themselves they knew. The fear of aging is not always about looking older physically. For many, it represents loss of control, relevance, energy, or opportunity. People begin wondering whether they wasted time or made wrong life choices. The older they become, the harder it feels to ignore those questions. Modern culture also amplifies fear of aging in unhealthy ways constantly. Youth is often treated as the peak of beauty, value, and desirability. Advertisements glorify young bodies while portraying aging as something to fight. Eventually, people start seeing natural aging as personal failure instead of reality. Social media has intensified this psychological pressure even further in recent years. People compare themselves against edited images and unrealistic standards every day. Aging becomes emotionally terrifying when self-worth depends heavily on appearance. The person no longer fears time itself, but becoming socially invisible over time. Death anxiety often operates quietly beneath everyday human behavior and decision-making. People distract themselves through work, entertainment, achievement, or endless consumption. Not always because these things truly satisfy them emotionally in the long term, sometimes because silence gives the mind space to think about mortality directly. This is why many individuals fear stillness more than they admit openly. When distractions disappear, existential questions begin surfacing into conscious awareness. What happens after death? And did my life actually matter at all? Questions like these can create profound anxiety when left emotionally unresolved. Psychologists developed something called terror management theory to explain this behavior. The theory suggests humans manage death anxiety through meaning and cultural identity. People cling to beliefs, values, traditions, and achievements to feel psychologically secure. These systems help individuals feel connected to something larger than personal mortality. Religion has historically played a major role in reducing fear of death. Many belief systems provide explanations about what happens after human existence ends, whether through heaven, reincarnation, spiritual continuation, or eternal consciousness beyond life. These ideas can offer emotional comfort in the face of uncertainty and loss. Even people who are not religious still search for symbolic forms of immortality. Some pursue fame, legacy, family, creative work, or historical recognition. Others want their ideas or achievements to survive after physical death occurs. The human mind deeply resists the idea of complete disappearance from existence. Fear of death also connects strongly to attachment and unfinished emotional experience. People fear leaving loved ones behind or losing those they deeply care about. They fear missing future experiences they will never get to witness personally. And many fear dying before becoming the person they hoped to become. Regret plays a major role in death anxiety for many individuals psychologically. People often fear not death itself, but realizing life passed too quickly. The older they become, the more visible missed opportunities can start feeling. That awareness sometimes creates panic, disguised as productivity or constant busyness. Some people respond to aging by desperately trying to remain permanently youthful. They obsess over appearance, status, or proving they still matter socially. Others avoid thinking about aging entirely because the topic feels emotionally threatening. But avoidance rarely removes fear. It usually strengthens fear over time, internally. There is also fear connected to physical decline and human vulnerability itself. The body that once felt strong and reliable slowly becomes more unpredictable. Simple tasks require more energy, and recovery becomes slower with age. This can create frustration because identity often becomes attached to physical capability. Many people secretly struggle with watching their parents grow older too. Seeing loved ones age forces people to confront their own future eventually. The mind realizes time is moving for everyone, not just distant strangers. And that realization can feel emotionally overwhelming in very quiet, personal ways. Interestingly, research shows fear of death changes throughout different life stages. Young adults often fear dying before fully experiencing life and personal freedom. Middle-aged individuals may focus more on responsibility, family, and unfinished goals. Older adults sometimes fear dependency, suffering, or becoming isolated and forgotten. However, many elderly people eventually become more accepting of mortality over time. Not because death suddenly becomes pleasant or emotionally easy to face, but because repeated life experiences slowly reshape their relationship with impermanence itself. They begin understanding that change and loss are woven into all existence. Children grow up, relationships evolve, people leave, and entire phases disappear forever. Life constantly teaches humans that permanence has never truly existed at all. Aging simply makes this truth impossible to continue avoiding psychologically, and acceptance often begins where denial finally becomes too exhausting to maintain. One reason humans suffer so much around aging is attachment to identity. People become emotionally attached to who they used to be in the past. The younger face, stronger body, earlier dreams, or former versions of themselves. And when time changes those things, it can feel like losing part of identity. But identity has always been changing from the beginning of life itself. The child, teenager, and adult are already completely different psychological versions. Yet, people usually resist aging because later changes feel closer to mortality. Time becomes emotionally heavier when people start measuring what remains instead of what begins. There is also fear surrounding the unknown nature of death itself deeply. Humans are uncomfortable with uncertainty because the brain constantly seeks prediction and control. Death represents the ultimate situation where certainty becomes almost impossible to obtain. And the inability to fully know creates anxiety for many individuals internally. Some fear non-existence, while others fear possible suffering after death occurs. Some fear judgment, while others fear complete emptiness and eternal unconsciousness. The mind struggles because it cannot fully imagine its own absence. Realistically, consciousness, trying to imagine non-existence, creates a strange psychological paradox naturally. Despite all this fear, awareness of death can also transform human behavior positively. Many people become more emotionally honest after confronting mortality more directly. They stop delaying meaningful conversations, relationships, or important personal decisions endlessly. The awareness of limited time can sharpen appreciation for ordinary human experience. Aging can also deepen emotional maturity in ways youth sometimes cannot provide. People often become less concerned with impressing strangers as they grow older. They start valuing peace, authenticity, connection, and emotional honesty more seriously. Certain superficial desires lose power once time feels more visibly limited. The fear of death may never disappear completely from human psychology entirely. It exists because humans love, dream, connect, and become attached to life deeply. Fear is often the emotional shadow created by caring about existence itself. The more meaningful life feels, the harder letting go can become emotionally, but constantly fearing death can prevent people from fully experiencing life too. Some become so anxious about time passing that they stop living presently. They postpone joy, vulnerability, or meaningful risks, waiting for perfect future conditions. And eventually they realize fear itself consumed much of the time they had. Perhaps the goal is not eliminating fear of death completely forever. Maybe the goal is building a healthier relationship with impermanence and uncertainty. To understand that mortality gives life urgency, depth, and emotional significance. Without endings, many moments would lose the meaning they carry now. Every conversation, relationship, memory, and experience becomes valuable because it cannot last forever. Time creates emotional weight precisely because human existence is temporary and fragile. And while death remains one of humanity's greatest fears psychologically, it also quietly shapes love, purpose, and appreciation for life itself every single day.